Hi guys, welcome to the Art of Server. Today's video is basically the continuation of the R710 build series part 6, and we're going to talk about boot drive options. So one of the questions I get a lot from people who are building out their R710 is, hey, where can I install a boot drive? Where can I install my operating system? So I was originally going to show you guys 5 different options, but as you know, I usually test out everything before I share it with you guys, and one of those options, although theoretically sounded like it would work, I have not been able to get it to work. I've tried multiple times and it's failed on me repeatedly. So I'm actually going to only show you 4 boot drive options today. But I'll talk about the 5th one so that you can look into it if you want to and see if you can get it to work. If you can get it to work, leave a comment and help me out. I'd be really curious to see how what I might have done wrong or how to do that. So, all right. So first option for boot drive is probably the most obvious, and that is to put your operating system on one of the primary drive bays. Okay. And I'm not really going to go into this option that much because that's a fairly straightforward option. That's probably the way Dell intended it to work originally when they released the server. But you do need to configure your boot drive on the LSI controller. And I already made a video about that, and that's why I'm not really going to talk about this that much, but I'll leave a card up in the corner here for you so that you can check out that video on how to set up your boot drive selection on the LSI controller. All right, so that's option number 1. Now let's get into the inside of the server here, and let's talk about some of the other options. So one of the things I really like about Dell, I think since about the 8th generation of their PowerEdge series of servers, is that they usually have a USB-A port internal in the system. And sometimes it's on the motherboard, but in the R710, it's actually up here by this, I don't know what you call it, the I/O panel or something like that. But anyway, there is a USB-A port here. And now this is USB 2.0 only, so it's not a very fast USB port. But either way, for a boot drive, you don't really need something super fast. And so you can always install a USB drive and install your operating system on this, and this is completely bootable. I have one of the Easy Store 32 gig USB drives in here, and I already have Linux installed on this USB drive. I actually have Linux installed on all the different boot options I'm going to show you today. And so later on in this video, we'll get into the iDRAC interface, and I'll show you the boot drive selection for all these different options. Right now, I'm just kind of show you the physical layout. Okay, so that's option number 2. Okay, so the third boot option for the R710, and you might have noticed this already, but there is a SD card reader right here. And now this is a additional option. It doesn't come by default with the R710s. If you get an R710 that actually already has this installed, that's terrific. But a lot of R710s will not have that option, so it's something you have to buy separately and install it as an add-on option. Now this is basically, I think, a USB SD card reader, and it connects with this cable so this board here comes out easily like this. It's very easy to install, by the way. There's these 2 prongs on this side here that go into the slots over here, and then you simply just kind of press it down until the other side clicks in and it secures it in place. Now you do have to connect this to the board over here through this cable, and I believe that makes the USB connection and basically powers this SD card reader. I will leave the part number to this SD card reader as well as this cable on the screen here, and I'll also leave a eBay affiliate link for you to buy this on eBay if you want to. And keep in mind, if you buy through those links, you will be supporting my channel. I do get a slight commission for any purchases you make through those eBay affiliate links. Now, one thing to note, if you are going to buy this option, make sure to get it with the cable. Sometimes it's sold without the cable, and usually end up spending more if you just have to find the cable by itself. So I would just go ahead and find something, a listing for this where it includes the cable, and that way you can just kind of install the whole thing. Usually just works out better that way. Okay, so anyway, you can install an operating system. I already have a Linux operating system installed on this SD card as well, and that gives me a 64 gig boot drive. Okay, which is probably a lot more than I actually need, but you know, you can choose any size SD card you want for installing a boot drive in the SD card reader. Okay, so fourth option for a boot drive is the optical bay. So these R710s often came with a DVD drive back when DVD drives and stuff like that were still fairly useful. Sometimes you might not have it, and then there'll be some sort of blank here that you can pull out. But either way, this optical bay, if you don't need the DVD, which these days a lot of people don't need them anymore. Let me pull this out and show you. You can replace the optical drive or the blank or whatever you have in here with one of these trays. So this is basically a 2.5 inch caddy that fits in the laptop optical drive format. And so you can get one of these, you can put a SSD in here and then install it in this slot and just simply plug in this cable, and now you can use this as your boot drive option. Now if your R710 did not come with a optical drive and you only have a blank here, you might actually also need to get this cable. So that cable is a special cable, and I'll leave the part number to this cable on the screen for you so you can go look for this. I will also leave a link in the description of this video so you can find this cable on eBay. But this cable has a SATA connection that goes to the blue SATA port on the motherboard. And by the way, these SATA ports are all, both of them are SATA 2, and they're not SATA 3, so they only run at 3 gigabit, which is fine for an optical drive. But my point is, if you're going to put an SSD in here, I would not spend a lot of money getting a really fast SSD because you're not going to be able to connect at 6 gigabits per second. There's no SATA 3 support here. Okay, so but as a boot drive, that's probably just fine. There's really no need to have a extremely fast boot drive. Anyway, this cable here provides the SATA connection, but it also provides a power connection here. And this power connector connects to a plug that's underneath the fans here on the motherboard that provide power to the optical drive. And it provides enough power for something like an SSD, so that should work fine. Now, one of the challenges of installing a boot drive, you know, getting creative and trying to find a way to install a boot drive, is that there's not a lot of power connections. You know, unlike a normal like desktop PC where you have additional Molex or SATA power plugs coming from the PSU, you don't have that in the server environment. Usually you have just enough of, you know, what was originally designed to fit in the server. And so if you know, as you can see here, there's additional opening space up here, and you could easily Velcro an SSD in here or something like that. But the challenge is always finding power. You do have the SATA for the data connectivity, or, you know, if you add another SAS controller here, you can obviously connect that with some breakout cables. But usually the problem is finding power. So having this cable is a convenient way because it kind of solves that problem for you, and there's already a plug for that goes neatly in. Now, of course, you can always get creative and run solder some wires to the power distribution here and get some power that way as well. But, you know, that's just a little bit more elaborate than I think a lot of people will want to do. So I'm just kind of showing you some of the more straightforward options to get a boot drive in here. Okay, so anyway, I will leave the part numbers to the cable, as well as the links to the cable on eBay and the links to this 2.5 inch drive caddy. Now, one thing to note, you'll notice that this drive caddy kind of just slides right out. That's because there is supposed to be a bracket here that clicks. You'll see this blue little dot here. There's supposed to be something that attaches to the back of the optical drive that is kind of like a retention clip to keep the optical drive from sliding out. I found that little clip did not fit on this 2.5 inch caddy, so I don't have it here, and that's why this is a little bit loose. Maybe I need to find longer screws. Maybe you know, maybe there's a different 2.5 inch caddy that will fit better. I don't know. I haven't really looked into it, but you know, honestly, it's yeah, if I push on it, it slides out, but it doesn't really slide out on its own that much, so I'm not too worried about it. If I was, you know, more worried about it and I could not find a way to get that retention clip on, I could, for example, put some felt tape on the bottom to kind of just increase the amount of friction so that this doesn't slide out easily. So anyway, there's multiple ways to address that if you are concerned about it, but just something to note that these drive caddies, at least for me, the one I got, didn't seem to easily accept the bracket that installs here. So anyway, just wanted to point that out. All right, so before we turn on the server and we'll get on the iDRAC interface and I'll show you how all these boot options work, I'll tell you a little bit about the fifth one. So the fifth one is right over here. The iDRAC module itself has a SD card slot, and it's right back here. It's called a vFlash, Dell vFlash slot, and you have to get, well, you don't have to, but I think in order to have a decent size partition on this thing, you have to get a Dell, you know, specially formatted, created vFlash card. This is an 8 GB vFlash card from Dell, and you can create, with one of these vFlash things, you can create up to a 4 GB partition, and you can then install an operating system on it, and this device will show up as a boot device that you can use. Now here's the thing, I found out about this option on Dell's website actually. There's a set of instructions showing you how to install ESX VMware on one of these and to boot off of it. Dell says officially it's not a supported method, but they do give instructions on how to potentially do that. I tried doing that, not installing VMware, but installing just a Linux distribution, and the mechanics of it seems to go fine. You install this, you format it, you create a partition, it shows up as a boot device. You start to install, the install sees it as a boot device and starts installing on it. Everything is fine and dandy up until somewhere in the middle of the install. Ultimately, this drive goes away and the card fails. And I've done this now on 2 of these vFlash cards. So I'm not really sure what I'm doing wrong. I don't know why it keeps failing during the installation, and these cards basically get rendered unusable. So maybe I just have bad luck and these are just, you know, at the end of their endurance. I don't really know. But anyway, that would have been the fifth option, but since I can't get it to work, I don't really want to tell you guys that that's a workable option. Now, for somebody else who might be watching this video, if you know about setting up a OS or a boot drive using the vFlash and getting, you know, how to get that to work properly, you know, leave a comment and share that with us. Share it with me. I'd love to learn, and maybe with some tips I can try it out again. I do have a few more of these sitting around, so I could always try it again, but I just could not get this to work. All right, so with that said, let's close this guy up and let's get on, oops, that's the other way. Let's get on the iDRAC Java console and boot this machine up, and I'll show you the boot options I've talked about today so far, and show you how to select the boot order, boot sequence, and all that stuff, and show you that I already have operating systems installed on these 3 boot devices, and I'll show you that I actually can boot off of them. So anyway, all right, let's go do that. All right, guys, so here we are at the Java KVM to that R710. Let's go ahead and power this guy on. All right, at this point I'm going to hit F2, and we're going to enter the system setup BIOS, and I'll show you how all the boot options that I have installed right now will appear in the BIOS. Alright, so here we are in the system BIOS. Let's go down to boot settings, and I will show you the boot sequence. Oh, actually, that's not that interesting. That's just hard drive C embedded SATA. So that's just a SATA port. Let's do hard drive sequence. Alright, so you can see here there are 4 different options to boot from. The first one is the embedded SATA port A, so that is that SATA port that's connected to the optical bay where I have the Intel SSD. There is the internal USB, and so I have that SanDisk Cruiser USB stick there, and then there's an internal SD card flash reader, so that's that 64 gigabyte SD card, and then the integrated SAS. So this is basically the H200 controller. I've enabled the boot support in that controller, and I didn't select the specific boot device, but by default it picks like the first 2 hard drives it detects as the boot device, the primary and backup. Alright, so you can see all 4 of those are listed in the boot sequence as a hard drive boot option. And one other thing, if you go into SATA settings, so this is specifically regarding that Intel SSD in the optical drive bay. If you don't have a DVD drive in there by default, very likely these SATA ports are disabled, because if you enable one of these SATA ports and the device is not connected, for whatever reason, the R710 will complain about that and will show an error during post and ask you whether you want to go into the system setup to correct it or to continue booting. And so it kind of interrupts the boot sequence or the post process. And so by default, if nothing is connected to it, so if you don't have the optical bay, these ports are usually set to off so that they are disabled and that error doesn't show up when you're booting the machine. So just keep that in mind. If you don't already have a DVD drive and you add something, you might not immediately see it until you come in here and actually enable that SATA port. Now, conversely, if you are removing something, make sure you come in here and turn that port off, because if it's left disconnected again when you boot up during post, it's going to report an error about that, and it'll disrupt the post and boot process. Alright, so that's what that looks like. I'm going to go ahead and boot one of these drives. So yeah, you can see here there are a lot of boot options. Not really sure what this is about. I'm kind of wondering if my rerun of Grub picked up. Yeah, so this, I didn't notice this earlier, but I had just updated the server or the installation. I think this is probably on the SSD in the optical bay, and I reran Grub, and I think Grub detected the other OSs installed on the other drives and I guess added them to its configuration. So here you'll see this is the internal flash, this is the USB drive, and I'm not really sure what, yeah, this is all advanced options. I don't know. Well, anyway, here, let's just boot this one here. This should be the native kernel for the installation that is on the SSD. Alright, so now I've labeled my installations because they're all CentOS 7, by the way. I've installed CentOS 7 on each of those devices, so on the USB drive, on the SD card, and also on the SSD that's in the optical bay. And in order to distinguish them, I've changed the host names on each of those installations. So this is the R710 CentOS 7 SATA_A, so this is the one that is in the optical bay. And you'll see that those other boot options are there. So right now we are booting off of SDG, which is that Intel SSD, and just to kind of show you that, you'll see that boot is on SDG2, so that's that's the Intel SSD right now. So yeah, anyway, this is currently booting the Intel SSD that's in that optical bay. And like I was telling you earlier, let's take a look. Oops. What in the world was that? So like I was telling you earlier, this that SATA port is a SATA 2 only, so it's only 3 gigabits. So you'll see current speed, SATA speed is 3 gigabits, even though this Intel SSD is capable of 6 gigabit, as you can see here. You're not going to connect any faster just because of the limitation of that SATA port. So, you know, if you want to get a SATA 2 SSD, that's probably perfectly fine as well. So anyway, just make note of that. Don't expect this boot option to be a 6 gigabit option here. Alright, let's go ahead and reboot this thing, and I'll boot into the other boot devices so you can see that that works as well. Alright, so I just pressed F11 to get into the boot manager so that I can manually select one of the other boot devices to boot from. Okay, so here's the boot manager. Now if you go down to hard drive C, you'll see that all those different boot devices that we saw earlier in the BIOS are listed here. So we've already booted off the embedded SATA port A, which is that SSD in the optical bay. So this time let's boot off of the internal USB drive and show you that that also works. Alright, so as you can see, the host name here is now R710-CentOS7-USB_int. So this is the name I gave the installation that is on that USB drive. Alright, so as before, we'll be able to see all the the first 6 are the hard drives in the front bays, and now there's the SSD, the USB drive that we're currently booted off of, and then also the flash reader. And I guess in this case, let's see, I don't think we're able to see much on the I don't have smarts. Oh, okay. I don't have the smart util installed here. Let's go ahead and install that. Yeah, as you can see, this is a completely different installation. The last installation, I apparently had the smart CTL tool already installed. I apparently have not installed it here. So yeah, so you're really not going to get much smart data, obviously, because this is not a normal SAS or SATA device. This is a USB flash drive. And just to confirm, you can see that /boot here is on SDH, and you will see that indeed SDH is the SanDisk Cruiser Glide 3.0 USB drive there. Right, so you'll actually see that in LS USB, which apparently I don't have as well. I wonder what package has that. Install USB utils, maybe? Is there such a thing? Okay, there it is. Great. Okay, so now I can run LS USB, and you can see that I think this is the SanDisk USB drive right here, and then there's that other flash reader, a flash card reader. Okay, so let's go ahead and reboot this, and then we'll show you that it also boots off of the SD card reader. Okay, so again, I went ahead and pressed F11 to get into the boot manager so that I can manually select what device I want to boot from. Okay, once again we'll go down to the hard drive C option, and we've already booted off the USB. We've booted off SATA port A, which is the SSD in the optical bay, and so the last option here is the SD card flash reader. well, actually, the fourth option would be the last option, but that's just the H200 SAS controller. So, again, I'm not going to go into that part because that's just kind of very trivial, and I have that other video that you guys can follow if you want to figure out how to set up the boot device in the LSI controller. Alright, so let's go ahead and boot the SD card now. Alright, as you can see, the host name here has changed as well. This one is called R710-CentOS 7-SD Flash. So that's the installation of CentOS 7 on that 64 gigabyte flash card. So again, let's do lscsi, and then df will show you that boot is now on SDI, and SDI is in fact the flash reader. And this is a 64 gigabyte, so you'll see root has 40, home has 19, so that's about what, 59 gigabytes of space, and there's probably some space, well, there's a gig lost to /boot. So anyway, this is roughly the 60 gigabytes or 64 gigabytes or whatever it is. But yeah, so there it is. So it boots off of the flash reader, it boots off of the USB drive, it boots off of the SSD that is in the optical bay, and of course it'll boot off of any of the hard drives in the front bay as well, but you know, again, that's, you know, probably the most obvious option, so I'm not going to talk about that. Okay, so anyway, those are the four boot options that you have on the R710, and you know, I'm personally fairly comfortable with having a USB flash drive. With certain brands of USB drives, I've had pretty good experience with that. So I know some people are concerned that USB flash drives just aren't reliable enough, and you know, that may be the case, I guess. I mean, I've had some of them fail on me, but and those were Samsung branded ones that failed on me. But the SanDisk ones I've had pretty good luck with. Haven't had one fail on me, and I've got several systems, not just my own, but deployed at customer sites and stuff like that in my consulting gigs, and I haven't had any of those fail yet. So you know, I think the USB boot option is also a pretty good one. I don't know about the SD card. It does work, obviously, but I've never used that long-term wise, so I don't really know, you know, at least in my limited experience, I don't really have nothing to say about, you know, whether that's a reliable option or not. But yeah, so the USB drive, I've had really good luck with that. Obviously the SATA SSD in the optical bay, you know, that's well, that's what it is, right? I mean, people have used SSDs for many years now, so you can guess how reliable that is. Okay, so anyway, I want to just share that with you guys, and hopefully this helps answer some questions and also gives you some ideas of maybe some of these things were options that you didn't think about before, and you know, help you guys out with your R710 server builds. Alright, so hopefully you found this useful. If you liked it, please give me a like, and be sure to subscribe. And there will be one more part to this R710 build series where I'm going to actually install some stuff. You know, these installations were basically just for test purposes. This server is going to a gentleman named Mike, who has already contacted me saying, hey, he'd really like to pick up the server from me, and he's told me that he's going to use Proxmox on this. And so in the next video, I'm going to install Proxmox, and I'm going to set up a VM with that GPU that I've shown you in the how to install a GPU in the R710 video, and we'll set up Plex in that VM and just, you know, play with it a little bit and see how well it does as a hypervisor with a Plex virtual machine in it. And that will wrap up the series. So in that next part, and then this server will be headed to Mike, and hopefully enjoy a new home. All right, so anyway, that's it, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and bye bye.